Buenas and half a day. I'm Tanya Champocamandiola with Joint Region Marianas Public Affairs, and you're watching Island Images. As you can see, right behind me is a gorgeous structure, the Guam Museum. And with that, I'd like to introduce two amazing women. Half a day. Right here is Nicole Calvo. She is the Department of Chamorro Affairs Museum Administrator. And standing right next to her is Miss Dominica Tolentino, the Guam Museum Director. Half a day, ladies.
Half a day, Tanya. Half a day.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Island Images.
We're very happy that you're here with us.
Okay, so can we go inside and then we'll find out what this amazing building has to offer?
Absolutely. Mala Hollow.
So Dominica, the museum has a really long history in Guam. Can you tell me about this building, the current museum, and then the museum's history?
Well, this current facility actually opened up just last November, so we're marking our first year anniversary. But the museum as an institution itself actually goes way back to the 1930s when the American Legion opened up the first museum on Guam. The idea of opening a museum, though, actually goes back into the mid-1920s when it was sort of realized that a lot of our artifacts and historic objects were being taken off island. And so there was a call by local teachers to try and preserve that history and keep our objects here on Guam. And what better way to do that than to establish a museum? So over the years, the U.S. Navy took over from the American Legion back in 1936. And it was a very popular place for people visiting Guam, especially those that were flying into Guam from the Pan Am Clipper. So they would also stay at the Clipper Hotel in Sumai, but they would also include the Guam Museum as part of the historic tour. And back then it was located in Agana on the Plaza de España. When World War II happened, the building itself was destroyed. And it wasn't until the early 1950s when an effort was put forth by the governor at the time and also the Guam Women's Council that became very involved in reopening the Guam Museum in the Garden House at the Plaza de España. In the 1960s, the Guam Museum joined up with the Guam Public Library system. So a lot of the artifacts were also stored at the public library. In the 1970s, though, the Garden House remained the main museum building. Then eventually in the 1990s, it was moved over to Adaloop, where the governor's office is located. But because of typhoons and inclement weather, it eventually was damaged. So the facility itself didn't really have a home, but Senator Tony Palomo, who was the director at the time in the 1990s
and who the museum,
early 2000s, and for whom the museum is named, he was really instrumental in sort of protecting the objects and also keeping the idea of a museum going. Most of the objects were stored first in Tidzin, in a facility in Tidzin, and then they were transferred over to the DNA building here in Agana. This new building is sort of the culmination of all of that long history and that effort to preserve our artifacts and our objects for our present and our future generations. In the mid-2000s, there were 3 designs that were put forward as sort of a way for the public to make a decision on which design was going to be the one that was going to be the current museum. And it turned out that this design is the one that was put forward by Cristobal and Laguatna, the local architects. And it really captures, I think, a lot about what this island is about and what our artifacts stand for. It's a really unique design. And they really took into consideration a lot of different aspects of Chamorro culture in order to make it as beautiful as what we have here today. You'll see lattice stones sort of is symbolic all around the building. The stone floors here were also they were bringing sort of the outdoors and the natural environment into the museum space. Even the presence of the 2 statues in the front were also inspired by the fact of other museums having majestic figures standing outside their building, guardians of the space. So we often get asked, well, who is that supposed to be? Hurao and Kepua, or who
those
are
our
they
chiefs,
supposed to be?
right?
Those are ancient Chamorro chiefs. But really, I think what the architect had in mind was really that these 2 individuals were just supposed to be like guardians.
There are quotes on both sides of the building.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about those and who do those quotes belong to and what's the significance?
The lyrics for the Chamorro hymn or the Guam hymn are out on the front. Those are the lyrics that Dr. Ramon Sablan had written, but they were translated into Chamorro by Mrs. Antalan back in the 1970s.
She was a teacher.
She was a teacher, a politician, a musician. On the other side, opposite that, we have the speech, an excerpt of the speech by one of the more famous Guam chiefs, Chief Hurao, who was known for gathering a contingent of about 2,000 Chamorro warriors in uprising against the Spanish colonization. On the back walls, we have two quotes from two Chamorro statesmen. One is F.B. Leon Guerrero, who was very instrumental in advocating for U.S. citizenship for Chamorros on Guam. And then there is another quote by Antonio Juan Pat, for whom the new airport is named after. And he is also an important statesman. He's also our very first elected congressional representative.
There's actually a gift shop, a really cool gift shop in there.
Most of the items in the gift shop are from local artists. So we have souvenirs, we have artworks, we have a multitude of books about Guam history and culture. We have t-shirts and cosmetics, all kinds of things that you could visit our museum store and buy souvenirs and take them back to your families or use them as gifts. We're really trying to support our local artists, our local artisans. But right next to in the same space as the retail, we also have a coffee shop, and so we have specialty drinks, different kinds of coffees. So even if you're not here to actually see the exhibits, you can still pop in during your free time and grab a quick snack. The food products that we also have in the museum, as far as the baked goods go, those are all also produced locally.
Thanks for watching episode 1 of 2 on the Guam Museum. Stay tuned for the next show when we talk to Museum Administrator Nicole Cavo.